So I'm guessing that a lot of you guys watching this video are going to be brand new to the channel. So hi, my name's Will and I've been sim racing seriously for about 18 months now, but pretty much my entire life in a more casual sense. So I'm lucky enough that over the past year or so, I've been able to transition across to making a living from my sim racing and review videos. And therefore I've had a pretty broad experience with lots of different types of hardware and equipment in that time. So just a little bit more information about me before we get started. Prior to that, I was an occasional track day goer. I've had a couple of different track cars over the years. And this channel actually started out as a project car building channel, but I'll put some links in the description below for you guys if you want to check out some of that content. But long story short, I made the decision about a year and a half ago now to transition from real life track cars across to sim racing. Now that decision was primarily due to, cost involved, time away from family, have young kids now, things like that. So I've actually got another video talking about that as well, which I'll link in the description. But I wanted something basically that would still give me the thrill of driving fast and still competing, but something that I could do from home and just pick up and put down whenever I felt like it, basically around my adult responsibilities. So with the current situation facing the world right now, sim racing has unexpectedly been thrust onto the world stage. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are finding themselves in a very similar scenario to where I was 18 months ago. So in this video series, I'm going to be taking you through my top tips for people who are just getting into sim racing, maybe sort of just wanting to wet their feet and check it out for the first time. So we'll be covering the hardware, the different types of sim titles available, my tips for setting things up regardless of whether you intend to spend a lot of money or a little bit of money. Now, I mentioned before that I have quite a bit of experience with a range of different hardware, but the purpose of these videos isn't going to be to sort of try to push you towards particular products. I will have some lists which I've created in the description below for you guys for products that I've personally tested and can recommend based off my own personal experience. But rather than offering specific product suggestions, I'd rather try and sort of make sure that you guys are well equipped to do your own research and be armed with the right knowledge so that you can be asking the right sorts of questions based on your own personal budget. So I don't claim to be the world's #1 expert in all things sim racing. So I'd suggest that you guys do share your own experience in the comments below. There's going to be a lot of people watching this video that are a lot more experienced than me, as well as a lot of people that are less experienced as well. So some points people will agree with pretty much unanimously. Other points are going to be more contentious based on individuals' experiences. So let's keep the conversation going in the comments below the video. The more experiences that we can share, the more helpful the content becomes. So let's make it a community effort. So we also have a 1,200 member strong Discord community, which I'll link above my head for you right now, where we're happy to answer all sorts of questions that you might have and offer our own advice based off our experiences. So be sure to check that out as well. But let's get started on the meat of this video. So on to my #1 top tip. And that is that you don't need to spend a fortune to be a competitive racer and have a lot of fun. Now, everybody's budget is going to be different. And unfortunately, as with any hobby, there is an element of elitism within the sim racing community. And at times that can trick people into thinking that they need to spend obscene amounts of money to be able to be competitive and have fun. So the first thing that I want you guys to understand is that that is absolutely not the case. To give you an example, I spent most of my childhood driving with an analog wheel that had absolutely no force feedback. And up until about 18 months ago with a 10-year-old Logitech G27 that cost me about 300 bucks back in about 2010. And that was just fixed to my computer desk. And you know what? I had an absolute blast driving with that wheel, and I really wasn't all that much slower than I am now with a rig that's probably worth pushing about $40,000 Australian. So the point here is that there's thousands of people out there that are winning races and championships every single day with very basic hardware. And in fact, the guy that I gave my G27 wheel away to once I upgraded to my Fanatec gear he actually ended up winning our league championship with it, which made me feel pretty inadequate. So you're probably wondering now, why is this the case? Well, this is a pretty complex question, but in my opinion, despite the incredible setups that can be built these days with all kinds of complex feedback, not only from the wheel itself, but even in the entire cockpit, there's still one major component that is missing, and that is G-force. So in a real car, your body uses the G-forces that you experience to communicate what's going on with the car. You can subconsciously make real-time adjustments and corrections based on this information that your body's receiving. And it all happens pretty much completely subconsciously. So despite the incredibly complex simulators that are available today, things like, traction loss, surge, all those sorts of things that you kind of would expect to feel in a real car, because no simulator is able to accurately reproduce exactly the same forces that you experience in a real car related to G-force, your body's forced to use other cues, or your brain's forced to use other cues, such as what you're seeing on the screen, what you're feeling through the wheel, etc. And that's why, to give you probably the best example I can, even one of the world's most famous sim racers, Jimmy Broadbent, he's one of the fastest guys in the world of sim racing around the Nürburgring. He's done thousands and thousands of laps around there. But when he jumped into a real car and tried to do exactly the same thing, he was really surprised at just how different the experience was, despite his obvious familiarity with the circuit from his thousands of simulated laps. So I would encourage you guys to check out that video. I've linked it in the description below for you guys. It's definitely an eye-opener into just how different things can be on a real life racetrack in a real car compared to a sim. That's not to say that sims aren't realistic. They definitely are realistic, and they're getting more realistic all the time. But there are always going to be a few things that are going to be a little bit different between sim racing and racing in the real world. So you guys need to be aware of that as well. Now, to just elaborate on that a little bit further as well, most professional racing drivers would tell you that the most value that they get from a sim is in familiarizing themselves with tracks, bumps and things like that that are around the track, rather than, sort of refining their driving skills, so to speak. And the reason for that is exactly the same as what we've just discussed. So this is where muscle memory starts to come into play. Once you've established muscle memory and your body can react to what the car's doing in the sim instinctively, it makes little difference what hardware you're actually using. Now, there are some important exceptions to that, most notably when it comes to pedals. So this brings us to point number 2, which is the single most important piece of hardware is your pedals. So the more realistic a set of pedals feel, the more range of control available, the more you'll be able to modulate your inputs and make small corrections. And this will ultimately lead to faster and more consistent lap times. I demonstrated this in a comparison video where I looked at the telemetry data from driving with my Fanatec V3 pedals compared to my HE Ultimate pedals. Now, we'll talk about pedals and the different types of pedals available in more detail in the next video, but it's important to make the distinction that when I say range of control, I don't necessarily mean how far you can push the pedal down, but suffice to say that for now, you'll find the most experienced sim racers will all agree that a good set of pedals and a solid platform to mount them to is the single most important factor when it comes to going fast and being consistent. So if pedals are the single most important piece of hardware, then very closely in second place would be a solid mounting solution or a cockpit. Now, you don't necessarily need to go all out and buy a full frame cockpit like you see in my videos. In fact, a lot of beginners don't even realize when they're shopping for equipment that your computer desk can actually be a more solid mounting solution than some of the cheaper all-in-one cockpits that are available on the market. So what's important here is that your pedals aren't sliding around on the floor and that your chair isn't going to be rolling back every single time you push your pedals down. Now, most entry-level pedals, like the ones you get with Logitech wheels, for example, do have their own solutions to stop them sliding around on the floor. So things like carpet spikes and stuff like that. But as you start to move up in the market, it starts to become assumed that you're going to have some sort of a cockpit solution or some sort of mounting solution. And obviously, as you start to have to put more force into the pedal, so it's more realistic in terms of the actual force that you're putting on the pedal, inevitably you're going to start having problems with the pedals sliding around on the ground. So there are some solutions that are available that are quite cheap for fixing your chair to your pedals, and I'll link some of those in the description below for you guys as well. But one of the cheapest and easiest ways is to simply put some caster wheels on your chair so that the wheels can't move around. I've even seen people steal their kids' shoes and use them to sort of stop the wheels from rolling around as well, with great results. So the point here is that you can use some creative license. You don't necessarily need to go all out and spend an absolute fortune on a cockpit, as long as the fundamental elements are taken care of. It could be as simple as, attaching your pedals to the chair with a piece of rope to stop them sliding forward. So spend some time and think about what sort of creative solutions you can come up with before assuming that you need to go all out and spend all of your hard-earned dollars on an expensive cockpit. Now, that is, of course, not to say that an all-in-one cockpit isn't an advantage in other ways, most noticeably in creating a lifelike and comfortable seating position. Now, any racing driver or any driving instructor will tell you that the correct seating position is the most fundamental element to driving consistently and fast. But my advice is, don't just jump in and spend a fortune until you're sure that you want to commit. I actually published a video just about a week ago now explaining exactly how to set up a correct seating position in a simulator. So I'm certainly not sort of trying to say that that's not important here, but just consider how close you can actually get to a correct seating position, based around your computer desk and the stuff that you have available to you before you start looking at spending a fortune on a simulator cockpit. Now, space, of course, is another very important consideration. Where do you intend to set up your simulator, and will you be needing to move it frequently? There are some really great portable cockpit solutions available. We reviewed one of those just a couple of weeks ago, and I will put a list of those together for you in the description below as well. But pretty much all of those are a compromise in terms of rigidity. So you really need to weigh up whether the portability is worth the sacrifice in rigidity. And as I said before, in a lot of cases, provided you are able to set up an ergonomic seating position at your computer desk with your screen, your pedals, and your chair all in the right places and nothing moving around, you're actually better off that way. Now, screen position and correct field of view is of course also very important, but we'll talk about that a little later on in the video series, as well as details around setting up triple screens, VR, choosing TVs and things like that as well. So we've mentioned rigidity quite a few times now, but why is it so important? When it comes to a steering wheel, it's pretty straightforward. A force feedback wheel generates not only the forces that you experience through the wheel when cornering, driving over bumps, rubbing wheels and fenders with other cars, and all the things that are obviously extremely important in developing muscle memory, as you now understand, but also the textures such as road surface, puddles, ripple strips, and feeling these effects more accurately won't necessarily make you faster, but it certainly adds a great deal to the overall experience in terms of immersion. And that's what makes sim racing, more fun. And that's where, spending a lot of extra money can, obviously make things more enjoyable for you. So when you introduce a lack of rigidity or flex into the equation, a couple of different things happen. Firstly, it adds a dampening effect to everything that the wheel is doing. So effects feel less detailed, but more importantly, it also causes problems with consistency in how the effects are produced, which makes it really difficult to establish proper muscle memory in the first place. As an example, you might be hammering down a long straight, braking into a corner, and as you turn in, the wheel platform might be flexing and reducing the fidelity of the feedback in the wheel. Now, you may well be thinking that as long as it's consistent, it doesn't really cause an issue because, as long as the car's behaving in the same way, it's not a problem. Well, that's not exactly the case either. Imagine that you're going through a fast S-bend with really high curbs. And as you manhandle the steering through the change in direction, as you bump over the curbs, the wheel platform will flex a lot more than it did through the corner that you just drove through a moment ago. Now, the reason for that is because you're actually physically putting a lot more force into the wheel through a change of direction than you would be just through an easy right-hander or left-hander. And because of the dampening effect, as well as the fact that the wheel is physically moving around on the wrong axis, this is going to introduce a significant variation in how the car's behavior is interpreted by your sensors. So it's going to feel quite different at the limit of grip through that S-bend from what it did in the corner that you just went through a moment ago. So even though it might be the same every time in the same corner, the difference from corner to corner makes it very difficult to learn the car's limits instinctively. And this is the main reason why you want to eliminate flex in your wheel platform as much as possible. Now, the same principle applies to braking too when it comes to consistency. If things are moving around and the braking feel isn't consistent as you drive, you're never going to be able to establish proper muscle memory. Think about shooting basketball hoops, for example. If you stand in the one place and just shoot basket after basket, eventually you're going to get pretty consistent, even though you might be consistently missing. But even doing something as simple as slightly adjusting your stance can send you right back to square one. It's exactly the same with sim racing. Any sort of variation whatsoever, and it really throws out your muscle memory, which really affects your consistency and your speed. So my recommendation, regardless of budget, is to always get the best pedals that you possibly can. Make sure that you're mounting them to something as solid as you possibly can as well, and that's not going to move relative to your chair wherever possible. If you are going to go ahead and buy a cockpit, make sure that you have the space for it, and make sure that you're getting something that is suitable for the wheel and pedals that you intend to mount. For example, my first cockpit was a Next Level Racing FGT, and it was absolutely fine for my Fanatec V3 pedals and my Club Sport wheelbase 2.5, but I wouldn't recommend it for a direct drive wheelbase because the more powerful wheelbases with the heavier pedals, you start to get a little bit of flex and that starts to become an issue, and you'll effectively be wasting all that extra fidelity that you just paid for with your expensive wheel and pedals. So you want to make sure that you're matching the cockpit to the to the hardware that you're going to be mounting on it. Now, your best bet here is simply just to look at reviews. Of course, we have an abundance of those right here on this channel, but also just talking to people about their own experiences. Now, admittedly, with all sorts of hobbies, people do have a tendency to tell you that what they have is the best, and that's simply just due to the fact that it's their only experience. So obviously take this into account when you are talking to people, but generally speaking, most respected manufacturers are pretty clear about what wheels and pedals their products are intended to be used with. So definitely make sure you are paying attention to that. So in the next video, we'll be digging deeper into the world of sim racing pedals. We'll discuss the differences between different types of pedals, such as load cell and potentiometer pedals. We'll talk about things like hydraulic dampeners, vibration motors, ABS, and a whole bunch more. Then we'll move on from there into steering wheels and wheelbases. We'll talk about belt-driven, cog-driven, and direct drive wheels. And then onto monitors, TVs, VR. We'll also be taking a look at PCs and console hardware, what's required to actually get a good experience. and how to put all the pieces together. So if you're not already subscribed, now is a great time to hit that subscribe button. And while you're down there, make sure you also hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when the next video is released. So I really hope that you guys have found part 1 of this video series helpful. Please do leave a thumbs up if you found it helpful and enjoyed it. And please also let me know in the comments if you have any other questions whatsoever. Of course, feel free to reach out on our Discord community as well if you did have any other questions. But thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.